from the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. It is April 29th, 2021. I've got a great show coming up today. I have a special guest that I'll be bringing up here in just a few moments that'll be helping me break down the risk, impact, and mitigations of the latest stories here in cyber, including this new F5 BIG IP that is vulnerable to the Kerberos KDC spoofing, a high-severity vulnerability in Cisco Firewalls, a Microsoft SharePoint spoofing campaign that's really, really good, and a bunch of news around deterrence and building awareness around cybersecurity. So all of that is there. So for those tuning in, we are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Good morning. Please make sure to subscribe, follow, share today's show. You can comment live. We'll bring you up on the show when you do that. So today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Whistic, and soon here I'll be bringing in Duane Newman. He's the head of product over at Whistic, and he'll be joining me today to kind of break down the stories today. So before we do that, for those listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, thanks so much for tuning in. As you're listening, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and please share this show with your friends and family. That's how you help boost us up. And now, without further ado, let me bring in Duane Newman. He's the head of a product over at Whistic, a good friend of the show. Duane, good morning.
Good morning, James. It's awesome to be with you this morning.
It's great to be with you. And Matt Lee says, good morning, Matt. How is it going, my brother? So we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about today, but, I can't start the show, Duane. I can't without a cup of coffee. And my normal double espresso that people have now become accustomed to, and I like to share my master's cup too, because I'm a big golfer. I don't know if you are, Duane, but.
No, terrible. I'm not at all. They kicked me off the range. I'm so bad, James.
Well, I'm enjoying my double espresso, and because I have a guest, I get to drink this whole thing during the show today because I don't have to carry the whole thing myself, which is awesome. All right, so let's start off with our first story today, where cybersecurity researchers disclosed a new bypass vulnerability labeled CVE 2021-23008 in the Kerberos Key Distribution Center security feature impacting the F5 BIG IP application delivery service. So the KDC spoofing vulnerability allows an attacker to bypass the Kerberos authentication to BIG IP, access policy manager, bypass security policies, and gain unfettered access to sensitive workloads. This is according to Yaron Kessner and Rotem Zak, both from Silver 4 in the report. In some cases, this can be used to bypass authentication to the BIG IP admin console as well. Coinciding with the public disclosure, F5 Networks has released patches to address the weakness, CVE 2021-23008, with a CVSS score of 8.1, folks, with fixes introduced in the BIG IP APM versions 12.1.6, 13.1.4, 14.1.4, and 15.1.3, and a similar patch for version 16 plus is expected at a future date. Duane, before I get to you, Matt's having cold brew this morning. That's good for you, Matt. Leah, the unbelievable Leah, good morning, and thank you for being here. The guy who makes everything happen for veterans. Jacksonville may be online, but Paul is all over this country. And Rob with a good morning to you as well. Duane, what's the biggest risk you're seeing from F5? Because they tend to have these every 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, it's staying on top of just keeping them patched. I mean, the risks here with F5 is, from a company perspective, you can't keep this cadence. You just can't keep this cadence. And they're going to have to get ahead of this. And they're going to have to, quite frankly, some of these that they may be working on in the back room, they've got to make it a priority and get these guys patched, because the cadence that interrupts every couple of weeks. From a practitioner perspective, you're out there, you get the patches applied, you fight the fire, and then you're going to fight the fire again and fight the fire again and fight the fire again. And so it's, there's going to have to be some time and effort, obviously, but they're going to have to jump. They're going to have to start jumping ahead on these and make it a priority. It feels like it's a little behind.
So Matt says F5 has had it rough. I would say yes, but this kind of goes to something I always like to say, which is practicing security is hard. And it's a practice like medicine. Doctors practice medicine, they don't do medicine. And when you go to a doctor, you hope you're in that non-percentile where they don't screw up. But if you are, you're in such a low percentile. And F5 has traditionally made appliances that have been ahead of their time. And so those are going to be inherently vulnerable to this kind of stuff. Part of the fact is we need a better system of vulnerability management and identifying these weaknesses within the community. So, I mean, again, I like bug bounty programs, and I hope that F5 just understands this and launches a very lucrative bug bounty program to help the community, help them identify these things before they become a real risk for an organization.
Yeah, great.
So Daryl says, good morning. Daryl, good morning, brother. How are you? Let's move to our next story today, where now we move to Cisco. And Cisco is having a bit of a hard time here. They've had high-severity vulnerabilities that expose Cisco firewalls to remote attacks. The patches have been released for multiple vulnerabilities in the firepower threat defense software, including high-severity issues that could be exploited for arbitrary command execution or denial of service attack. This is now being tracked to CVE 2021-1448. So understand, when you see these numbers like 1448, they've known about this since probably the third week of January at this point. That's a fairly fair assessment. The patch took around 90 days probably to create. And so that's a significant impact. They're giving this a CVSS score of 7.8. And I look at those, and again, I look at them from a perspective, Duane, of it's 7.8 to who? If firepower threat defense is one of my key lines of defense in my defense in depth strategy, then this might be a 9.9.
Yeah. Well, and the response times, I think that's the other thing I was going to call out here as well. Response times matter. They matter to those that have to put these in place. And so just, it's a little mind-boggling sometimes, especially, and like you said, this is a 9.9 depending on how you have this implemented.
Right. So there's no workarounds for this. You do have to patch.
Yep.
You really do have to patch, and you got to get it done. From a vendor risk management perspective, here's the thing about this. And we saw this with the Microsoft Exchange web shells, and we'll talk about that here in just a few moments on the show, because we do have an update from the FBI over the move of them going into web shells today. So you guys want to stay until the very end as we follow that through. But this kind of points out to the whole idea of do you have an inventory list of your critical vendors and their products online to know that when something like this happens, you're following up and you're realizing that's a threat vector. So the traditional way of doing vendor risk management really does need to change. I know Whistic's at the forefront of doing that and kind of trying to get rid of Excels and move it more to a SaaS platform. But you do have to have inventory. Duane, are you seeing more companies now ask for inventory of critical products being used, or is that still kind of an afterthought?
Well, it is an afterthought, but yes, the question is coming up more in this intersection of the vendor risk management and the asset management, if you will, knowing what you have, where it is, how it's configured, and then dovetailing that into the vendor risk management. That's a key way to get the visibility into your environment, so that you don't have a system over here that's the checks and balances, and you have a system over here that actually is your system of record of where things exist. And so we're getting asked that more and more is how can I take the actual asset view of my company and then show that live against the risk state, and what I have. And so, yeah, they're coming together, no question. And the the days of I manage this in a spreadsheet or I manage this in 3 different systems, it just doesn't allow for the response that's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of affected devices in the Cisco thing, a ton of affected appliances that are need to be patched and addressed. If you're a Cisco firewall shop, this should be top of mind this morning before going into the weekend. Get these things patched. If your MSP or MSSP manages this, pick up the phone, ask them what's the timeline to get it patched, and put a rush on this. Specifically understanding that once I've seen this, and once Duane's seen it and you've seen it, our adversaries have seen it as well, and now they're out scanning for it. And so I don't want to say don't be that guy, because patching is also fairly difficult to do in some cases, but definitely set workarounds. Definitely, start to look at if you can't build, just because Cisco says there's no workarounds doesn't mean they don't exist. I was on a call yesterday with a great group of CISOs from the continent of Africa ahead of a show we're doing for June. And, they have infrastructure problems where in some of the cases, they don't always have electricity running 24/7. So imagine every time you reboot a system there, it's vulnerable to an attack. And so they've come up with really genius ways of addressing those specific vulnerabilities that we no longer think about. And so it's a show I'll be bringing to all of you guys in June. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be an awesome live discussion. So definitely be that. Let's talk about this next one, because Duane and I spent about a good 10 minutes looking at this and going, wow, this is really good. So a Microsoft Office SharePoint is targeted with a high-risk Phish ransomware attack. And so the phishing campaign, which was discovered by Cofense, is draping itself as a Microsoft Office SharePoint theme and successfully bypassing security email gateways. The post that was distributed on Tuesday says that this is an example of why it's not always prudent to share documents via Microsoft's hugely popular, widely used SharePoint collaboration platform. So now, according to Cofense, we shouldn't use business enablement tools for business enablement. Sorry to call you out on this one, Cofense, but you brought it on yourselves. The Phish is targeting Office 365 users with a legitimate-looking SharePoint document that claims to urgently need an email signature. So we all know that to be the case. This in itself has targeted over 200 million Office 365 users, a lot of them who have not used or have not enforced DMARC or SPF DKIM policies within their environment. Duane?
Yeah, well, what's crazy about this one is, as we were talking earlier, is it looks spot on. I mean, it looks like the exact same thing. Yeah, there's a screenshot of it. And, it comes back to education. It comes back to the end users and the education of the end users and how they're using the system. And so if you don't have practices in place on your first line of defense, meaning people are actually understanding how they should look at attachments and look at email, they're going to fall into this. Now, then there's the issue itself and Microsoft getting this remediated. But this is over and over. If they're not educated, there's going to be an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree that this is just beyond education as well. This is the idea of maintaining your Office 365 and having a good administrator that's paying attention to this stuff and going in and blocking these known IPs, using your threat intel feed correctly in order to identify these attacks before they happen and really address them spot on. Phishing is always going to be an issue, but we've always got to look at it. A few comments here that I've missed that I want to bring up. So Paul says about F5, if they are having these issues so often, they need to revisit how they're doing project management. It feels as if they are just doing waterfall, which is not a way I would go. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that comment, Paul. But I also understand that if, Big IP is only 8% of your business, you're probably only going to invest 8% of your budget and workforce to deal with it. And this may require more. So they either need to do one of two things. If Big IP doesn't account for that big of a market share for them, maybe discontinue the line, or maybe start a whole new line and replace it, but do it correctly. That's one way to look at it, Paul. Thank you for that comment. And Matt says Rockwell Automation too for Cisco. Yeah, Rockwell Automation has been hit hard like Cisco has. So Two more stories as we end the show here today, one of which is a coalition of security experts are sharing actions to disrupt ransomware attacks. A document that was released by the Institute for Security and Technology provides a list of 48 actions that governments and leaders in the private sector can adopt to seriously curb the ransomware threat. The ransomware demands last year averaged hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you see here they've said it's the 21 days is an average downtime due to ransomware attacks. 287 days is the average days it takes to fully recover from an attack. $350 million is what victims paid in ransom in 2020, and the average payment was $312,493 in 2020, an increase of 171%, according to our friends over at Palo. And so in 2020, nearly 2,400 U.S.-based government, healthcare facilities, and schools were victims of ransomware. That's significant.
Yeah, I love in the recommendations here, number 2, where it says the United States should lead by example, execute a sustained, aggressive, whole of government. I mean, what a great statement. Whole of government, intelligence-driven, anti-ransomware campaign. This isn't something that's just targeting different areas of the business community. This is rampant, and with those numbers that you just shared are,
modest.
What's that?
They're modest.
Yeah, they're modest. I think we're only seeing numbers of the reported. There is, and I've seen numbers anywhere from 50-60% of the attacks aren't even being reported out because they're too concerned about, the exposure and the additional exposure they could cause. And so I love this whole of government, recommendation. We've got to do something to, protect and, kind of elevate the visibility a bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Paul says this goes back to the February Tech Town Hall. There needs to be department-specific cyber awareness training. Some enterprise users put a video on yearly and mute it to finish work. Yeah.
It's along with their HR training, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's along with HR training and all that other stuff. It is. Here's the thing about this stuff. Number 5 to me is what I think is really going to be something that goes all the way through and through. The best way to cut off the head of the snake is to go after its wallet. So go after the wallet, hold financial institutions accountable for cashing in Bitcoins of cybercrime, no different than how you would hold a bank who financed terror responsible. And you would probably eliminate 90% of these from a monetary perspective. Once you can't make money off of it, it goes away. So they talk about computer Congress. I spent the weekend on the Hill, so I'll speak a little bit more to that on a different show this week as well. So our final story is the FBI now talks about their web shell debacle. So for those who don't know, the FBI a few weeks ago decided to get a court order warrant to go in and remove web shells from existing computer systems without notifying the owners that they're doing it. And they didn't patch the servers. They just made a copy of the web shells and removed them, leaving the servers still vulnerable for a new set of web shells should the perpetrators decide to do that. Assistant Attorney General John Demers, who spoke at an event for the Project for Media and National Security at GW, said that the operation was a first of its kind. They had extensive discussions, and they're figuring out how to use this capability in the future. So as a practitioner, here's my message to the FBI and DOJ. You, over the last 4 years, have done an amazing job building trust with the private sector. The move that you did caused more headaches for us, and now it's going to be more difficult to get you involved from a legal perspective because now our general counsels are going to be more concerned with you guys coming with another warrant to get more things off of our systems, and we're private entities. So, the kind of idea of that is very, very still disturbing, and the FBI should really reconsider this tactic as a one-off and not something that they plan to use going forward. In not every case, maybe, but definitely in some other cases, they deem to be important. Duane, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a careful balance, right, between stepping in to protect and stepping into, as an open door for additional information. I think you call out an interesting conundrum, right? It's like, how do we do that, but not all of a sudden put ourselves in a place where we're beginning to access and or lose the trust and the faith of the private sector? And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, the statement at the end where he says, the choice government had was to continue to leave these open or take court authorized action that we did. Ultimately, we decided to move ahead. It's going to have to be a really pragmatic approach here, or it's going to cause the concern that you just outlined.
All right, so Matt disagrees. Matt, I'd love to hear your argument over that, because I'm all for people giving me their point of view. I think it's really important that I understand why. To me, that's critical. A court authorized action means nothing to me anymore. And I'll be honest, because I think the judge who signed off on this had no clue what it really meant. It was probably presented to him in a warrant as saying, like, we're doing everyone a favor. This is an unbelievable thing that we're doing. This is what we should be doing, and not really given the ability to have someone from the other side argue in front of the judge to hear the effects of it. And that's the challenge with these warrants.
Yeah, and earlier on, he even says something, we don't yet have sort of worked out what our criteria are going to be going forward. Now he says, we're going to do that. However, I think that's where it causes the pause. Not understanding the criteria, not understanding the gates and the protections that are put in place.
This is going to be very interesting, and definitely something that a lot of people are going to be watching, especially general counsels, going forward, and expect this to be another loophole. Folks, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching. We'll have an awesome Tech Corner on tomorrow, so make sure to check that out. I'll be live later today for CISO Thursdays with the magnificent Naomi Buckwalter, my sister from another Mr. Renee Small, and my brother from another mother, Chris. We'll be live on Renee Small's LinkedIn page, so you want to check that out. That's 1 p.m. Eastern. Today, we're going to be talking about cyber culture, and we have Brian, the CISO over at EAB, joining us to talk about cyber culture today in the organizations. So you don't want to miss it. It's going to be an off-the-chain show. And I'll be back Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern with the Practitioner Briefs. Yesterday, CISO Talk dropped with Patrick Benoit, the BISO and Global VP of GRC for CBRE, with Duane's CEO, Nick Sorensen, the CEO over at Whistic. You guys have seen Nick before on the show. So we had Whistic was kind enough to release a report called The State of Vendor Risk Management. I sent it over to Patrick Benoit, and Patrick was like, this is really cool. We should do a show about it and bring Whistic on. And that's exactly what we did. And it's a great little show around vendor risk management. You should definitely go. And if you haven't subscribed to the CISO Talk podcast, go and do so right now. And you can also see the playlist at the end of this video right now on YouTube as well, or in the feed below on the CyberHub podcast LinkedIn page. So that's it for us here today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your comments. And here's Matt's thing before we sign off. So most of the SMB small corp space were actively ignoring the threat and calls from the FBI, increasing the national impact from a spread and an ammunition perspective. True, but I don't know if they were ignoring calls, because the FBI and the warrant never specifically said they couldn't reach it. In fact, they when they went in and removed the web shells, the people who they couldn't trace, they just kicked it out to the ISP and had the ISP notify them. So that to me became a whole different set of challenges, because if you think of, an MSP somewhere, or someone who set up someone's IT system who's still getting emails and doesn't know what to do with them and who to forward it to, that could have been an issue. And again, this is the balance, right? So what's that like? So listen, Matt, it's a great discussion point, man. I don't know that I have the right answers, and I don't know that anyone does, but that is that. Argany says, very informative. Thank you, James and Duane. Thank you for tuning in, Argany. I hope I said your name right, brother. So that's it for us here, folks. Duane, thank you for coming on the show, man.
My pleasure, James. Thanks for the invite.
Pleasure. All right, guys, we'll be back Tomorrow, Tech Corner, go check out CISO Talk. And Monday morning, I'll be back right here with another Practitioner Brief. Until then, have a great weekend and stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.